cotton became a symbol of American wealth and slavery. And the result was the American Civil War, which was fought to some extent over slavery in the 1860s. Symbol of American wealth and slavery. Okay. And the result was American Civil War. What is American Civil War? What is Civil War? Civil War is a war fought inside a country by groups of people, by different groups of people, rather than fighting other countries. Do you understand? Civil means the events, relating to events that happen inside one country. And the American Civil War was fought partly because of slavery. North was against slavery. Okay? And the South, the southern states, were for the slavery. Okay? Understand? The North was called what? They were called the Unions. The Union. Union means several states becoming one, alright? And South was Confederates. Confederate is what? An organization or a group having smaller groups or states forming it. Do you understand? For a political purpose or a some other purpose. Okay. So why were the North against slavery? Because they were good people? You sure? That's because in the North, industry was developed, okay? Factories, right? While in the South, they were mostly farming, okay? So in the South, they need human power, manpower, which was the slaves, all right? So they needed slaves, and the northern states, because the goods were produced by machines, they didn't need that much slaves. So that's why. So why did North support the black people? That's because they wanted the votes from them. Do you understand? That it's not because they were good people. Well, a lot of them were good people, but it's not just that the North was good and the South was bad. It's not about that. It's about whether they needed slaves or whether they wanted the votes of the black people. That's what it is. Okay. And the cotton caused the American Civil War, and it was fought partially over slavery. Partially means to some extent and not completely. You know what I mean? to produce cotton, the southern states needed slaves. So it caused the American Civil War. Do you understand? So what is this part about? This part is about the results of the cotton industry growing. Why? Because it says another result of the growing industry is this. So this the thing that the author said in the first part is also the result of the growing cotton industry. The first one was what? The result was what? The textile industry in India was no longer able to compete with English textile mills. After English colonized India in the 18th century, India's textile industry weakened and it became a provider of raw materials rather than the finished products. And the other result was what? Many American farmers in southern states started growing cotton on large plantations, large farms that used slave work power. And cotton became the symbol of American wealth and slavery, and it caused the American Civil War, which was fought to some extent over slavery in the 1860s. Do you understand? Let's go to the next part. So, by the middle of the 19th century, cotton was England's leading industry. The amount of it was over half of all imports and exports in 1830s and 1840s. It accounted for, what does that mean, account for? Account for means to be the reason, to be the explanation for something. Do you understand? Account for. Or to be a particular part of something, a particular amount of something is account for. You understand? So the amount was over half of all imports and exports. But in 1843, the government approved textile machinery, which it guarded, not wanting other nations having the secrets of it, okay, having the know-how of it. They permitted the textile machinery to be exported. Permit means allow something, right? Machinery is the machines used in a factory. They, before this time, they guarded this textile machinery. They didn't want any other nation to have it, okay? But they allowed it in 1843. And this caused the development of competing textile industries in Japan, Brazil, and the newly rising India. Resurgent. What does that mean, resurgent? It means becoming strong after being in a weak state. And dealing with competitors who relied on cheap manpower, the English textile industry finally became weak in the 20th century. They were no longer competitive. Facing means what? Dealing with, right? Being in a situation where you have to deal with something. So what is this part about? In the middle of the 19th century, cotton was England's leading industry. and it was more than half of all imports and exports in 1830s and 40s. But in 1843, the government allowed textile machinery to be exported. They, but before this, at some time in the past, they have guarded this. They didn't want anybody else to have this, all right? And this caused the development of competing countries like Japan, Brazil, and India to develop the textile industries. And because the other countries had cheap labor, the English textile industry became weak in the 20th century. This is what this part is about, alright? According to paragraph 1, which is not true, of the Industrial Revolution in England, which is not true, the supply of raw materials in England helped the English operate their factories. Is this right? Let's go to paragraph 1. There were some factors that made England ideal for developing cotton industry. They were what? One of them were what? Overseas colonies providing raw materials. That means what? Who provided the raw materials? Not England, right? So, A is not right, so A would be the answer. B, it primarily centered on the textile industry when it was in its beginning stages. It's centered on the textile industry. Is this right? The Industrial Revolution started in England, and one of the early successes the English had in their industrialization was their development of cotton weaving industry. So it was in the early stage. So B is right. England had many intelligent people whose creations enabled many changes to occur. Is this right? What was another factor for England becoming an ideal country for developing cotton industry? What? England also had many creative geniuses that invented the machines and processes which made the industrialization possible. Alright, so this is right. Actions by the government kept competition from other countries at a minimum. What was another factor? The government intervention, okay, in the form of protectionism, kept the cotton industry from having to deal with any competitors. So this is right. So the answer is what? A, alright? Let's go to the next.